Please, I beg you, keep your entire human species out of this war. We've all heard the horror stories of your deranged determination and the piles of corpses you insane apes leave behind. I'd rather lose to the Krill than doom the galaxy by drawing mankind into this meat grinder. The wounded Sheliak soldier Theros shrieked at Gerald Ross, still shaking from his narrow escape. Gerald had been on a routine patrol near the edge of Sheliak space when his ship's sensors picked up the distress signal. Investigating, he found a badly damaged Sheliak vessel under heavy fire from hostile Krill warships. Despite the risks, Gerald dove in with guns blazing to rescue the sole survivor, Theros. As the adrenaline wore off and Gerald brought Theros aboard his fighter, the terrified alien began babbling about the desperate war raging between the Sheliak and the Krill, a powerful empire hell-bent on galactic conquest. The Sheliak were hopelessly outmatched. Krill forces outnumbered them 10-1, wielded superior weaponry, and regenerated from grievous wounds that would kill any other species. Total annihilation loomed. But Theros didn't plead for aid. He begged the human to stay far, far away. Stories of humanity's prowess echoed across the stars, the tenacity, the ingenuity, the utter refusal to surrender against impossible odds. If the Krill learned of humankind's existence, they would stop at nothing to exterminate such a threat. Better for the Sheliak to die than sentence another race to oblivion. An urgent distress call interrupted Theros' fevered warnings. A Sheliak colony was under heavy assault, civilians be damned, and faced imminent destruction. Gerald stared at the comms, jaw tight. No other help would arrive in time. It was him or no one. Honor Theros' plea and abandon them to their fate, or risk revealing humanity's presence to save innocent lives. The weight of the galaxy itself hung on Gerald's next move, and the seconds were ticking away. He gripped the controls tight enough to break them, his decision crystallizing in his mind as he hit the thrusters. Gerald banged his head on the throttle, rocketing his ship towards the besieged Sheliak colony. Theros' dire warnings echoed in his mind, but he shook them off. Innocents were dying. He couldn't just sit back and let it happen, not when he had the power to make a difference. And from the sound of it, these Krill bastards were a threat to everyone in the galaxy, humans included. Better to face them now than wait until they came knocking on Earth's doorstep. He hailed his superiors over the encrypted channel. "This is Lieutenant Gerald Ross. I have encountered a hostile alien force attacking civilians, requesting immediate backup at my coordinates, sending all relevant data now." "Lieutenant, you are not authorized." Gerald cut the link before they could finish. Easier to ask forgiveness than permission. He glanced over at Theros, still shaking in the co-pilot's seat. "I know you're scared, but we have to do something. What can you tell me about these Krill? How do we take them down?" Theros swallowed hard. "They regenerate, shrugging off wounds that would kill any other species, and their numbers are vast. You can't fight them head on." Gerald nodded grimly. "Then we'll have to be smart about it. Guerrilla tactics, hit and run, minimize our losses." His hands flew over the controls as he pushed the engines to their limit. As they approached the colony, the scale of devastation became clear. Krill warships pummeled the surface with relentless bombardment, while dropships disgorged hordes of troops. The colony's defenses were in shambles, crumbling by the second. Gerald gritted his teeth and plunged into the fray. His ship's advanced human weaponry spat death, every shot precisely aimed. Krill vessels exploded under the onslaught, giving the beleaguered defenders a moment's respite. "I'm going to land at the central square. Gather as many civilians as we can. Theros, coordinate with the remaining Sheliak forces. Buy us some time." Gerald set the ship down hard, crushing a pack of Krill soldiers beneath the landing gear. He charged out, rifle blazing, his small team of Marines at his back. Sheliak colonists stared in shock as he yelled for them to move. "Come on, we're getting you out of here." Dozens of civilians crammed into the cargo hold as Krill warriors closed in from all sides. Gerald and his team fought like men possessed, holding the perimeter against the regenerating hordes. "Lieutenant, we can't hold them." Gerald cursed as he saw the Sheliak defenses collapsing, Theros and his soldiers driven back. Just as the Krill surged forward for the killing blow, the sky split open with new starbursts of fire. A flight of human warships, summoned by Gerald's distress call, screamed out of FTL with guns blazing. Their overwhelming firepower scythed through the Krill ranks, obliterating their ships and soldiers alike. The aliens broke and fled before the unexpected reinforcements, their invasion smashed. In the sudden silence, Sheliak colonists surrounded Gerald, praising him as their savior. But his actions had a cost. Theros stormed over, absolutely livid. "You fool! I told you to stay away. Now you've drawn your species into a war that will consume the galaxy." Gerald met his furious gaze. "I couldn't just abandon you to die. And now, we have a chance to end the Krill threat for good." The Sheliak leadership were quick to capitalize on the shift in momentum. They immediately reached out to Earth, desperate for an alliance against extinction. Theros, for all his anger, was appointed ambassador to the negotiations. But even as the talks began and the scale of the coming conflict crystallized, Gerald felt the weight of his choice bearing down. His actions may have saved this colony, but they had also lit the spark of a war that would set the stars ablaze. Humanity was on the front lines now, for better or worse, and Gerald would have to carry the consequences of that, whatever they may be. Gerald paced the dimly lit conference room, his footsteps echoing off the stark metal walls. The neutral world chosen for this summit was little more than a barren rock, but it served its purpose. He glanced at the gathered Sheliak leadership, their alien features unreadable to his human eyes. "We need to act fast," Gerald said, his voice firm. "Every moment we delay, more of your people die." Theros stepped forward, his wounds from their earlier escape still visible. "The lieutenant is right. We must put aside our fears and work together." For hours, they pored over intelligence reports and tactical analyses. Theros revealed critical weaknesses in Krill's strategy. Their reliance on regeneration made them overconfident, sloppy, and their ships, while numerous, had exploitable design flaws. Gerald leaned over the holographic display, pointing out key targets. "Here and here, precision strikes on these systems will cripple their largest vessels, and if we hit their supply lines, we can slow their advance." The Sheliak admiral, a towering figure with iridescent scales, hissed skeptically. "And how do you propose we accomplish this? Our forces are decimated." "Earth will provide an elite vanguard force," Gerald explained. "Small, mobile units equipped with our most advanced weaponry. Meanwhile, we'll send covert teams deep into Krill space to sabotage their shipyards and disrupt their logistics." Murmurs of concern rippled through the Sheliak delegation. The risk of provoking full-scale retaliation against Earth was immense. But Theros spoke up, his voice carrying a hint of desperation. "What choice do we have? We face extinction either way. At least with the humans, we have a fighting chance." Days of tense negotiation followed. Gerald argued passionately for his plan, knowing the fate of two species hung in the balance. Finally, with great reluctance, the Sheliak agreed. Within weeks, human strike teams were deployed alongside Sheliak forces. Their first target, a Krill resupply convoy near the front lines. Gerald led the assault personally, his fighters screaming out of the void alongside a mixed squadron of human and Sheliak craft. "All units, weapons free!" Gerald barked into the comm. "Remember your training. Hit them hard and fast." The battle was chaos. Krill ships swarmed like angry insects, but the precision of the human Sheliak attack took them by surprise. Gerald's targeting computer locked onto a cruiser's vulnerable power core. He squeezed the trigger, unleashing a salvo of missiles that punched through the enemy's shields and detonated deep within the ship's hull. The Krill vessel split apart in a spectacular explosion. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield as the Allies struck with surgical precision. When it was over, the convoy lay in ruins, and the human Sheliak force withdrew with minimal losses. It was the first of many successes, Hit-and-run raids crippled Krill supply lines. Sabotage teams wreaked havoc in their shipyards. For the first time in years, the Sheliak dared to hope. But the Krill adapted quickly. They massed their forces, accepting losses to overwhelm the Allies through sheer numbers, and their retaliation was brutal beyond measure. Gerald stared at the casualty reports in horror. Entire Sheliak colonies wiped out, billions dead. The screams of civilians caught in Krill bombardments haunted his dreams. "Was it worth it?" he asked Theros, his voice hollow. "Did I just doom your people to an even worse fate?" Theros placed a hand on Gerald's shoulder. "We chose this path together, my friend. It is the only way forward, no matter how painful. We must press on." But as the war raged across the stars, the weight of Gerald's choice pressed down on him like a black hole. The battle for survival had only just begun, and its true cost was yet to be paid. Gerald's early victories against the Krill proved fleeting. The alien forces adapted with brutal efficiency, deploying massive interdiction fields that left human and Sheliak fleets stranded in hostile space. "We're sitting ducks out here," Lieutenant Commander Reyes shouted over the comms as Krill warships closed in around them. Gerald's own vessel shuddered under sustained fire, shields failing. "All ships, form up on me," Gerald ordered, his eyebrows furrowed. "We punch through their lines or die trying." But for every Krill ship they destroyed, 10 more took its place. Gerald watched helplessly as Allied vessels were torn apart, their crews' screams cut short by the vacuum of space. In a moment of desperate inspiration, Gerald devised a risky gambit. "Strike teams, prepare for boarding action. We're taking out those interdiction projectors." Theros balked. "That's madness. We'll be slaughtered." "We're dead anyway if we do nothing," Gerald shot back. "All ships, coordinate strikes on my mark." What followed was carnage. Human and Sheliak commandos launched simultaneous assaults across a dozen systems, fighting their way through Krill defenders to reach the projector stations. The cost in lives was staggering, but they succeeded in sabotaging enough to create a gap in the interdiction net. "All ships, jump now," Gerald roared as his team sprinted back to their shuttle, Krill plasma bolts sizzling past. Not everyone made it. Gerald's heart sank as he watched Allied vessels torn apart mid-jump, their crew's final moments frozen in silent screams. But enough escaped to keep the fight alive. Back at their makeshift base, Theros urged caution. "We must withdraw, regroup. We're no match for their numbers." Gerald shook his head. "That just gives them time to tighten their grip. No, we need to hit them where it hurts." He pulled up a hollow map of Krill territory. Their homeworld, the heart of their empire. Theros recoiled. "Impossible. Their defenses are impenetrable. It would be suicide." "Maybe," Gerald admitted. "But if we can strike at their leadership, their production centers, we might just have a chance." Despite Theros' objections, Gerald assembled an elite team of human and Sheliak operatives. They donned prototype stealth suits, their bodies shimmering into near invisibility. "Remember," Gerald briefed them, "we piggyback on their supply ships. Once planetside, we split up and hit our targets hard and fast." The infiltration went smoothly at first. Gerald's team slipped past orbital defenses, planet-side scanners, and roving patrols. They struck swiftly, assassinating Krill commanders and sabotaging vital facilities. But their success was short-lived. Alarms blared across the Krill capital as the invaders were discovered. "Fall back!" Gerald shouted into his comm as Krill death squads swarmed the streets. He and Theros found themselves cut off, pinned down in a bombed-out building as Krill forces closed in. "This is it," Theros said grimly. "We failed." Gerald was about to reply when his datapad pinged. His eyes widened as he scanned the intel. "Not yet. Look at this. Gene banks, the source of their regenerative abilities." Understanding dawned in Theros' eyes. "If we destroy those—" They fought their way through the city, ducking from cover to cover as Krill energy weapons scorched the air around them. Finally, they reached the heavily fortified gene bank facility. "I'll arm the charges," Gerald said as they battled their way inside. "You hold them off." Theros nodded grimly, taking up a defensive position. Gerald raced deeper into the facility, the sounds of battle echoing behind him. He found the central vault and quickly set to work, fingers flying over the detonator controls. A plasma bolt seared past his head. Gerald spun to see Krill soldiers pouring into the chamber, Theros nowhere in sight. He armed the final charge and raised his weapon, knowing these next moments would determine the fate of the war. Gerald's fingers flew over the detonator controls as plasma bolts seared past his head. The acrid stench of ozone filled his nostrils, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. He risked a glance over his shoulder, spotting Theros in the corridor beyond. The Sheliak warrior unleashed a barrage of plasma fire, his weapon blazing with blue-white fury. Krill soldiers poured into the facility, their chitinous armor absorbing hits that would have vaporized human flesh. Yet still they came, pushing forward with inhuman tenacity. "Almost there!" Gerald shouted, his voice hoarse. He punched in the final sequence, heart pounding in his chest. A deafening explosion rocked the chamber. Gerald stumbled, ears ringing. Through the smoke, he saw Theros hurl something, an incendiary grenade. It detonated in a blinding flash, engulfing the Krill in searing flames. "Get clear!" Gerald screamed into his comm. He sprinted for the exit, lungs burning. Behind him, Theros struggled to move. The Sheliak's legs dragged uselessly, leaving a trail of silvery blood. A Krill soldier loomed over him, mandibles clicking in triumph. Its armored foot lashed out, connecting with a sickening crunch. Theros howled in pain, his arm bent at an unnatural angle. But even as he fell, the Sheliak's good arm shot out, grasping the Krill's leg. They toppled together, locked in a final, desperate embrace. Gerald reached the doorway just as the charges detonated. The world went white. A wall of force slammed into him, hurling him through the air. He crashed into unyielding metal, stars exploding behind his eyes. When Gerald regained consciousness, silence reigned. Smoke hung thick in the air, obscuring his vision. He pushed himself up, wincing at the stabbing pain in his ribs. His armor was shredded, exposing raw, blistered skin beneath. "Theros!" he called out, voice barely above a whisper. "Theros!" Gerald stumbled through the wreckage, coughing as acrid fumes filled his lungs. He found the Sheliak half buried under a fallen support beam. Theros lay motionless, his once vibrant scales dulled and cracked. "No," Gerald choked out. He fell to his knees, desperately searching for any sign of life, but Theros was gone. A distant rumble shook the facility. Through shattered windows, Gerald saw chaos unfolding across the Krill capital. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers. Krill soldiers stumbled and fell, their bodies twisting as their vaunted regeneration failed them. Gerald's comm crackled to life. "Lieutenant, we have your position. Extraction team inbound." He stared at Theros' broken form, bile rising in his throat. They'd won. But as the magnitude of what they'd done settled over him, Gerald realized victory had never tasted so bitter.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.